I failed everything, then a stranger gave me a second chance. I thought life couldn't get any worse, until it did. Honestly, if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be sitting on the cracked sidewalk outside a diner in a small nowhere town, smelling like cheap motel sheets and desperation, I would have laughed in their face. I would have said, "No way, buddy. I'm too smart for that." Turns out, being smart doesn't mean you're good at life. Who knew? It all started with my usual streak of spectacular failures. Job number 1, flopped. Fired after 3 months for lack of initiative, which is corporate speak for you slept through half the meetings and spent the other half browsing memes. Job number 2, ditto. Except this time they actually changed the locks on me because apparently showing up late 3 days in a row is grounds for immediate termination. College? Dropped out. Not because I couldn't handle the work, but because I couldn't handle my own procrastination. I'd sit in class scrolling through my phone, thinking I'd figure it out later. Spoiler, I never did. Somehow, I also managed to completely alienate my family. Not intentionally, of course. I just wasn't the golden boy my parents hoped for. My sister? She moved on with her perfect life. My mom? She stopped answering my texts after the third time I borrowed money and forgot to pay her back. My dad? Don't even ask. I think he just assumed I was dead by now. Honestly, in the grand scheme of things, I wouldn't have blamed him if he had been right. So there I was, 27 years old, living out of a dingy motel in a town I couldn't even pronounce. Every day was the same. Wake up late, work some mind-numbing odd job for just enough money to cover the motel and maybe grab a cheap slice of pizza if I was lucky, and then lie awake at night wondering if I was capable of literally anything besides messing things up. Fun times. Most mornings started with the shrill ringing of my phone's alarm that I always hit snooze 5 times. Because, let's face it, facing life head-on is overrated. I dragged myself to the bathroom. Well, bathroom is generous. It was more like a cubicle with a leaking faucet, and stare at my reflection. The guy staring back looked like someone who had given up on life in the middle of a bad video game. Hair sticking up in directions I didn't know hair could go. Eyes that screamed, "Why bother?" and a permanent frown etched into my face. Honestly, I didn't blame the mirror for wanting to avoid me. Work was never consistent, which is probably for the best because consistent work would have meant consistent failure, and I couldn't afford more crushing defeats. I'd spend a week here, a week there, doing everything from washing dishes to delivering pizzas. The worst part wasn't the physical exhaustion. It was the gnawing, constant reminder that I had no plan, no direction, and no reason anyone would ever want to give me a second chance. And then there was the motel. I could write an entire book about the joys of Motel 6 style living, but for the sake of brevity, imagine peeling wallpaper, a faucet that only works when it feels like it, and a carpet that could double as a biohazard. That was my life. And every night as I lay on the lumpy mattress that probably had more springs poking through than fabric, I'd think, this is it. This is the end of the line. One evening, after a particularly grueling day delivering furniture for some guy who thought tipping was a sin, I decided to drive aimlessly. My car, an old, rusting sedan that had seen better days around the time CDs were still cool, was practically held together by duct tape and wishful thinking. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to drive, to feel like I wasn't completely trapped in the spiral of failure. Of course. That's when life decided to make things worse. I was taking a turn a little too fast, probably because I was trying to convince myself I still had some semblance of control. And then, bang, a truck swerved out of nowhere and my car spun like it was auditioning for a NASCAR highlight reel. I slammed the brakes, skidded, and somehow managed to end up in a ditch just outside a tiny, flickering diner. Heart pounding, hands trembling, I sat there for a minute trying to convince myself I hadn't just ruined everything again. Eventually, I stepped out of the car, every joint in my body whining in protest. My phone naturally had 0 bars. Perfect. Just perfect. And then I noticed movement from the diner. A man, older, maybe mid-50s, with graying hair and a warm jacket, was waving at me from the doorway. I considered ignoring him because that's what I usually did. Avoid people, avoid responsibility, avoid literally everything. But something in his eyes, calm, non-judgmental, and oddly inviting, made me take a step forward. "Hey," he said, voice steady, not in a way that screamed pity. "You look like you could use a cup of coffee." I blinked. Coffee? That's what I get after a near-death experience? Yeah, I muttered, trying not to look like the complete disaster I was. He smiled and motioned me inside. The diner smelled like fried eggs and grilled cheese sandwiches, the kind of comforting smell that makes you forget for a second that life is slowly crumbling around you. I slid into a booth, hands shaking slightly, and watched as he ordered a coffee and some kind of breakfast sandwich. "I'm James," he said, sitting across from me. "You're Ethan, right? I saw your car out there. How'd you—" I started, but stopped. Didn't matter. None of it mattered. He didn't judge me. He didn't lecture me. He just listened. And in a world where everyone had written me off, that was revolutionary. "Bad day?" he asked casually. Yeah, that's one way to put it," I muttered. I wanted to tell him everything, to unload years of failure and self-loathing in one go, but instead I just stared at my coffee. wishing it could somehow erase the past decade of mistakes. You know, he said, leaning back slightly, sometimes things have to break before they can get fixed. That car could be the universe telling you to slow down. I snorted. Or it could be the universe laughing at me. He chuckled. Maybe a little of both. Listen, I don't usually do this, but I can give you a ride, get you back on the road, maybe even help you figure out your next step. No strings attached. I blinked. Why? Why would you care? Because, he said, his eyes locking onto mine in a way that made me feel both exposed and understood. I see potential in people who've been written off. I see it in you. I laughed bitterly. Potential? Right. Haven't heard that one before. People usually just write me off as a screw-up. Well, he said, standing up and offering me a hand, maybe it's time someone didn't. And just like that, a strange flicker of hope appeared in a life that had long been defined by failure. I wanted to be skeptical. I wanted to walk away, to continue my cycle of self-destruction, to embrace the comfort of being exactly where I was. But something in his tone, his eyes, his casual confidence made me pause. Maybe, just maybe, this could be different. I took his hand. And that, my friends, is how I found myself sitting shotgun in a stranger's car, heading somewhere unknown, feeling like the universe had tossed me a lifeline in the form of an unexpected angel disguised as a random guy in a diner. I didn't know if it would lead anywhere. I didn't know if I'd mess it up. I didn't know if I even deserved it. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, things could change. Little did I know, that ride was about to change my entire life. I never trusted anyone until he offered me a lifeline I didn't deserve. I know, it sounds dramatic, but let me explain. After the car accident and the diner encounter, I ended up following James. Yes, the stranger who somehow made me feel like I wasn't a total lost cause, back to his place. Not his home exactly, but his office. A small brick building tucked in a quiet street, kind of unassuming unless you knew what was inside. He ran a tech consulting business. Sounds fancy, but it was one of those places where a dozen people make other people's technology actually work, and the clients think it's magic. I sat in the lobby, trying to make myself as small and invisible as humanly possible, because that's how I function now. Stealth mode, blend in, don't embarrass yourself. And yet, James sat across from me, leaning back in his chair with this calm, almost smug sense that the world had room for me. Ethan, he said, tilting his head, I want to offer you something. I raised an eyebrow. Yeah? What? Free therapy? Another lecture on how I've ruined my life? He chuckled. Neither. I want to offer you a chance. A real one. Not charity, not a handout. An internship at my company. You'll get hands-on experience, learn skills, and maybe even prove to yourself that you're capable of more than just failing. I laughed, a bitter snort laugh. You're joking, right? You don't know me. You don't know how many times I've blown it already. This isn't some feel-good movie montage where I magically turn into a success story. This is my life, James. I fail. That's all I do. He didn't flinch, didn't try to argue or pat me on the back. He just said, I know exactly who you are, and I see more in you than you see in yourself. You've got potential, Ethan. You just need a chance. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to run. Pride, fear, and a lifetime of being burned by people told me to do exactly that. But there was something in his eyes, steady, patient, not pitying, that made me hesitate. Something about the way he looked at me made me think maybe this time it's different. I don't know, I stammered. I don't even know how to do anything useful. I mean, what if I screw it up? You'll make mistakes, he said. Everyone does, but that's how you learn. You don't get better by staying in the ditch. And then, I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was hope poking its ugly little head out of the rubble of my life. Maybe it was just the fact that I was tired of failing. Okay, I said finally. I'll do it. I'll try. James smiled. Good. First step done. The first day was terrifying. I walked into the office feeling like a penguin at a ballet recital. Clumsy, awkward, and completely out of place. The place smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, and the quiet hum of computers was almost soothing. Almost. James introduced me to everyone, which was easier said than done. My introduction went something like this. This is Ethan, James said. He'll be joining us for the next few months as an intern. Treat him like you would anyone else, except better. Cue the awkward half nods, fake smiles, and skeptical glances. I knew what they were thinking. Who is this guy? Is he another deadbeat? And honestly, I couldn't blame them. If I were them, I'd be thinking the exact same thing. I wouldn't trust me either. My first assignment was simple on paper. Help with a data cleanup project, sort files, organize spreadsheets, and basically make sure no one had to pull their hair out over my mistakes. Sounds easy, right? Except spreadsheets have a way of looking like ancient hieroglyphics when you're sleep deprived, nervous, and convinced you're about to ruin everything. I sat there for hours staring at rows and columns of numbers, trying to figure out what a pivot table was. Don't ask, I still don't fully understand them. Every mistake felt like a spotlight on my failures. Every time I typed something wrong, I could feel the eyes of coworkers, real or imagined, judging me. I wanted to throw my laptop out the window and cry. But then James came by. Not to yell, not to criticize, just to check in. Hey, he said, leaning over my shoulder. How's it going? Fine, I mumbled, avoiding eye contact. He didn't push. Just stood there, calm, watching me. And then he said something that stuck with me. Ethan, it's okay to be bad at something at first. The point isn't to be perfect, the point is to get better. It sounds cheesy when you read it, but in that moment, it was revolutionary. Nobody had ever said anything like that to me. Not teachers, not bosses, not my family. Everyone had just expected me to be perfect or else, and failing was all I knew. That day, I stayed late not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted to prove something to myself that maybe, just maybe, I could do this. The days that followed were a mix. Some moments were small victories, finally figuring out how to sort a messy spreadsheet without deleting half the files, getting positive feedback on a presentation I helped prepare, even making a coworker laugh by accidentally sending a cat meme to the company email instead of my personal chat. Yes, that happened. No, I will never live it down. But there were setbacks too. Every time I messed something up, which was often, my internal monologue reminded me that I was a failure, and some coworkers didn't exactly hide their skepticism. One guy, Darren, a junior developer who liked to think he was the smartest person in the room, made sure to point out every tiny mistake I made, sometimes loudly. Ethan, that's not how you format this, he'd say in front of everyone. I wanted to crawl under the desk and die. James, of course, was always there, not to scold, not to embarrass me, but to guide. He'd say things like, Darren's an idiot, don't let him get in your head, or mistakes aren't the problem. Avoiding them is. It was weird, having someone on my side without expecting anything in return. And slowly, tiny by tiny, I started noticing changes. My confidence, fragile as it was, grew. I could stay late without feeling ashamed. I could ask questions without feeling stupid. I could laugh at my mistakes instead of beating myself up. And more importantly, I started believing, just a little, that maybe I could succeed at something. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into the internship, James pulled me aside. You're doing good work, he said. Better than I expected, actually. Keep this up, and you'll have a real shot at something bigger. I didn't know whether to believe him or not, but the words sank in anyway, like seeds planted in soil that had been barren for years. Maybe, finally, something was taking root. It wasn't all smooth sailing. There were days when I wanted to quit. Days when Darren or some other coworker would scoff at me, or when I'd make a mistake so big I thought it might actually get me fired. Days when I'd go home to my motel room and stare at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever be more than a screw-up. But James always seemed to know. He'd check in, offer advice, and sometimes just sit there in silence, letting me figure things out for myself. He didn't coddle me, he didn't belittle me, he just trusted me. And that, more than anything else, made me want to prove that I was worth that trust. By the end of the first month, I realized something remarkable. I wasn't constantly failing, I wasn't worthless, I was learning, growing, becoming someone I actually kind of liked. Not fully, not yet, but it was a start. And that's what chapter 2 ended with. A guy who had failed everything suddenly realizing that someone believed in him, that someone saw potential where he saw nothing but disaster. And maybe, just maybe, that belief was all I needed to start rebuilding my life. Every day felt like climbing a mountain, but this time I had a reason to try. I never thought I'd say that. I mean, life had always been this endless, uphill slog where the peak kept moving farther away, and I was exhausted before I even started. But now, something was different. I had a foothold, a reason to claw upward, and that made all the difference. Since James gave me that internship, things had been complicated. Not in a bad way, necessarily, but in that disorienting way when your life starts to actually work for once. I had responsibilities now, actual expectations from someone other than myself, and somehow I was keeping up. Not perfectly, of course. My track record doesn't exactly scream consistency, but I was trying, and that was enough. At least for the first time in years, it felt like it might be. The mornings weren't easy. I'd wake up before my alarm, still half dreading the day, and force myself to shower, dress, and leave the motel room before my self-doubt could convince me to crawl back into bed and binge watch some random show on my laptop. Breakfast became a habit too, because James insisted we start the day fueled, which sounded preachy at first, but actually worked. I started to feel like a human again instead of a walking cautionary tale. Work was intense. Not in a soul-crushing way, but in a way that demanded I pay attention, focus, and actually use the brain I'd been neglecting for years. I was learning discipline, slowly but surely. The first time I successfully completed a project without someone having to redo my work, I felt this weird surge of pride. A small victory, yeah, but after years of failing at everything, it felt enormous. Teamwork, though, was a whole different beast. I'd spent so much time pushing people away, refusing to ask for help, or pretending I could handle everything, that learning to trust others and let them trust me was exhausting. Some days I still had flashbacks of past failures, the echoes of my parents' disappointment, friends walking away, professors rolling their eyes at me. I'd sit at my desk, staring at the screen, and suddenly I was back in a classroom at 20 feeling stupid and incompetent. It was in those moments I realized why I'd always failed. Not because I couldn't do the work, not because I lacked potential, but because I was terrified of failing. I built this armor of avoidance, of laziness, of self-sabotage, and it had protected me from growth, from risk, from success. But now, with James watching, guiding, and quietly believing in me, I couldn't hide anymore. I had to face it. And so I tried. God, did I try. I also started patching up pieces of my life I'd abandoned long ago. My sister Sarah had always been the golden child, the one who made our parents proud, the one who could do no wrong. I'd envied her, resented her, and then when I inevitably failed again, I'd avoided her. But one afternoon, after a particularly exhausting day, I found myself dialing her number on a whim. My thumb hovered over the call button for 5 minutes before I pressed it. Hello? Her voice was cautious, wary. Hey, it's me, Ethan, I said, my voice cracking before I even started. There was silence for a moment. I almost hung up, but then she said, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I know. I messed up, Sarah. I know I have, but I'm trying now. Really trying. She sighed, a mix of exasperation and something softer. Okay, let's talk. Slowly. That conversation didn't fix everything, but it opened a door I'd slammed shut years ago. We started small, texting, then calls, then occasional meetups. Each interaction was awkward, but honest, and every time I saw her, every time she let me back into her life, it felt like I was slowly reclaiming pieces of myself I'd lost to fear and failure. Work, family, self-respect. It was a balancing act I had no experience managing, but somehow it was working. I was learning, stumbling, learning again, and growing. And then the crisis hit. It started with an urgent email from one of our biggest clients. A system we had been managing for months had malfunctioned overnight, erasing critical data. Panic spread through the office like wildfire. I felt my chest tighten. This was my chance to fail spectacularly. The familiar surge of dread hit me. This could ruin me, ruin the company, ruin any progress I'd made. James didn't panic, not outwardly. He assigned tasks, coordinated the team, and quietly handed me a section of the project to fix. My first thought was, I can't do this. I'll ruin everything. But then I remembered his words. Mistakes aren't the problem. Avoiding them is. I dove in, fingers flying across the keyboard, spreadsheets, code snippets, and endless streams of data. Hours passed like minutes. My back ached, my eyes burned, and my brain threatened mutiny, but I kept going. Every small win, restoring a file, correcting a formula, reconnecting a database, felt like climbing another ledge on the mountain I'd suddenly decided to scale. There were moments when I froze, when I stared at the screen and felt paralyzed by fear. But then, I remembered Sarah's voice, James' calm guidance, the tiny victories that had brought me here. I could not let this break me. I would not. By the end of the day, or maybe it was the middle of the night, I lost track of time. I had helped restore the system. The client called the next morning, relieved, even impressed. Darren, the coworker who used to mock me, gave me a curt nod. Not a smile, not praise, just acknowledgement. It was enough. Standing there, hands shaking, adrenaline crashing through me, I realized something profound. I wasn't the same man I was a few months ago. I was tired, yes. Scarred, yes. But stronger. More capable, more resilient. I had faced my fears, leaned on others, and kept moving forward despite every instinct to quit. That night, walking back to my motel, I let myself smile. For the first time in years, it wasn't bitter. It wasn't forced. It wasn't tinged with self-loathing. It was real. I had a long way to go. There were still mistakes to make, lessons to learn, and bridges to rebuild. But I had proven finally that I could stand again. That I could climb mountains instead of sitting at the bottom, wishing someone else would carry me. And that, more than anything else, felt like victory. Turns out, redemption isn't given, it's earned. I never thought I'd hear myself say that. I'd spent so many years believing that life just handed out wins and losses at random, and that I was destined to be nothing but a string of failures. But now, after months of clawing my way back from the edge, I understood that redemption wasn't some magic gift. You had to fight for it. And somehow, against all odds, I'd started to do just that. The first thing I noticed about my life now was how it had changed in the small, everyday ways. I wake up early, not out of fear or necessity, but because I want to. I actually make coffee before heading to work instead of stumbling out of bed like a zombie. I dress like a person who's ready to tackle the world, or at least ready to pretend I know what I'm doing. And when I step into the office, I no longer feel like I'm trespassing in someone else's life. I feel capable. The internship that James had offered me months ago had morphed into something bigger. He saw potential in me that I hadn't even recognized in myself, and slowly I had stepped into it. I was no longer just a guy trying not to screw up. I was someone making decisions, guiding small projects, mentoring newer interns, and actually contributing. Every time a task went well, I could feel the invisible weight of all my past failures lifting just a little. But growth doesn't come without confrontation. A few weeks ago, I had run into Todd, one of my former friends from college, the kind who had spent years convincing me I was doomed to fail. He had looked at me with that same smug, judgmental expression, the one that always made me shrink. Ethan Miller, he said, eyes narrowing, I didn't expect to see you anywhere, but, well, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I said, shrugging, trying to keep my voice casual even though my heart was pounding. Life's funny that way. He smirked, clearly expecting me to stumble over my words or fall back into my old self-loathing, but I didn't. I held his gaze. Straight and steady, and for the first time, I felt the power of owning my own narrative. I'm actually doing pretty well, I continued, letting the words land like little hammers on the assumptions he'd built about me. Work's good. Life's better than it's ever been. He blinked, clearly thrown off. The smirk faltered. Really? Huh. Didn't see that coming? I nodded. Yeah. Turns out, failing isn't permanent. You just have to keep climbing. And just like that, I realized that the person I had been for so long, apathetic, afraid, beaten down, was gone. I'd climbed, I'd fought, and I'd started to become someone I could respect. James had been the linchpin in all of this. I think about him constantly. Without his guidance, his patience, his willingness to believe in me when nobody else would, I probably wouldn't be here. I'd still be stuck in the motel, working meaningless odd jobs, wallowing in the pity of my own choices. He didn't just give me a job, he gave me belief, structure, and the freedom to rebuild myself. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, James pulled me aside. "You're ready," he said quietly, as if he were reading my thoughts. I tilted my head. "Ready for what?" "To take what you've learned and give it forward. There's someone in the lobby right now. A kid. Bad situation. Could use a chance, just like you once did." I blinked. "Me? Mentoring someone else?" I swallowed hard. I don't know if I'm ready for that." James smiled. "You'll never be fully ready. That's the point. You help him anyway. That's how redemption works." That night, I met Alex. A 19-year-old kid, scrappy, terrified, and on the verge of giving up on himself entirely. I recognized so much of my old self in him. Hesitation, self-doubt, anger at the world. I spent hours talking to him, sharing my story, listening to his. I offered advice sparingly because I knew words weren't enough, but I also offered something more important: belief. I believed he could do better because I knew how much that buddy could change a life. Helping Alex was strangely cathartic. Every piece of encouragement I gave him reminded me of James, and every time he made a small step forward, it felt like I was reclaiming part of my own journey. Redemption, I realized, wasn't just about my life. It was about the ripple effects of belief and action. And then the emotional climax hit. I found myself sitting in my small apartment one night, staring at the ceiling, reflecting on the past few months. The magnitude of what I'd overcome hit me like a punch in the chest. I had been this close to giving up entirely. Motel rooms, dead-end jobs, lost family, lost self-respect. It could have ended differently, but James had stepped into my life when nobody else would. He had thrown me a lifeline and I had grasped it, shaking and terrified, but determined. I thought about all the failures, the lost years, the humiliation I had endured. And then I thought about all the victories, small as they might seem, fixing that system crash, reconnecting with Sarah, guiding Alex, earning the respect of coworkers. I wasn't perfect, I wasn't fully healed, but I was alive, capable, and moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The next morning, I walked into the office, shoulders squared, head high. I greeted my coworkers warmly, shared ideas in meetings confidently, and even offered constructive criticism where it was needed. Darren, the same coworker who had doubted me in the beginning, actually looked impressed, though being Darren, he'd never admit it aloud. James gave me a subtle nod from across the room, his eyes saying everything I needed to hear. "You've done well." I also reached out to Sarah again. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real, honest, and growing. We laughed together, shared frustrations, and even planned a small trip just the two of us, something I never thought would happen. Family wasn't just a distant memory anymore. It was something I actively nurtured. And the best part? I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I was building something. My career, my relationships, my self-respect. I was making choices that mattered instead of drifting through life and letting it pass me by. I had learned to stand, to fight, to hope, to believe, not just in myself, but in the power of second chances. By the end of that week, I realized something powerful. Life hadn't handed me redemption. Nobody had waved a magic wand and erased my failures. I had earned every ounce of progress through sweat, mistakes, learning, and courage. And now, armed with that hard-won knowledge, I could keep climbing, keep giving, keep living. That's what second chances really are. Not miracles, not luck, not gifts. They're opportunities to rise, to grow, to take the shattered pieces of your life and slowly, painstakingly, turn them into something you can be proud of. I'm still Ethan Miller, still flawed, still learning, still making mistakes, but I'm no longer the failure I once believed I was. And that feels like victory enough. Because now I know, no matter how far you fall, no matter how hopeless it seems, one person's belief can change everything. And one person's effort to rebuild, no matter how small, can turn a life around. I've been given a second chance, and this time I'm not letting it slip away. Alright, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.